I'm Greg Gorbach, and today I'm talking to Colin Masson, Industry Marketing at Microsoft. Welcome, Colin.
Great to be here.
Great. So, when we talk to our community these days, we're hearing so much at the high level about digital transformation and sustainability and topics like that. Can you talk a little bit about how Microsoft is investing in manufacturing these days?
Well, I don't need to remind you, Greg, but because we've been talking about Microsoft in manufacturing from early days of like Windows CE and Windows Embedded,
Yeah.
right? So we've really been in factories with technology to kind of power factories for several decades. And I always like to remind people we're a manufacturer and operate pretty complex supply chains ourselves. Of course, when I talk to people younger than us, they tend to think of Xbox, not necessarily Microsoft,
Sure.
right?
Right.
But we've been making keyboards and mice and, of course, Surface devices and some really interesting times now that we have these cloud data centers, right? That's actually a massive supply chain itself. I'm not sure if you've been to one of our data centers, but the rate we're putting them up, each one of those is a factory, right?
Sure. So we worked together recently on a pretty substantial global survey of manufacturers, and we covered a lot of interesting topics around this area. Was there something in there that jumped out at you that you'd like to comment on?
Yes, and it's part of our regular program of trying to listen to our customers, talk to industry experts, and it's one of the mechanisms, obviously fielding a survey, and so I was really pleased with the work we put together on that. And you wrote some of the insights, so I'm probably going to ask you back, right, in a minute.
Fair enough.
What were your key takeaways from that survey of just over 1,000 manufacturers? I was pleased that it was kind of global. We had roughly a third from the different regions, and then we had a nice mix of half the respondents really being factory OT people, and then 25% kind of IT, and another 25%, I'll say ET, but I usually have to explain that, kind of engineering, technology, the guys that drive that. So it was a nice mix, and with that kind of response, I think we still got a lot of work to do together on kind of analyzing that. But some of the quick takeaways, we were drilling deep into factory. So even though I mentioned the three roles, they were all associated with making decisions on factory digital transformation. And I'm sure you're going to talk about the midlife crisis, so let me not talk about that side of it. But the takeaways for me really were, firstly, that there was good alignment across the teams in needing certain things, and those things were no one vendor can do it all. They really want a platform, but an ecosystem supporting that platform. So that was good input for us in terms of what we're doing with Microsoft Cloud for Manufacturing, that really the partner ecosystem has always been key to Microsoft, but that was a doubling down of that affirmation. Interestingly, the different roles came up with different priorities, but if we summed it all up, they kind of saw a role for industry clouds from people like ourselves. They saw a role for industry ISVs, and they saw a role for the industrial automation guys and system integrators. And the order changed a little bit depending on whether you were talking to IT or whether you were talking to OT, right?
Yeah.
So I think that was one of the key takeaways, that the partner ecosystem is critical. Another was really that if you looked at what they wanted from the actual technologies, they wanted integrated security. So they didn't want, and that was interesting theme, obviously, here this week at your conference. We spent the whole first day, right, talking about security, and that comes out loud and clear that they want help with that. So anything they're getting from any of those providers needs to have integrated security tools. Another was really that they want integration with standard productivity and collaboration tools, right? That was a pleasant surprise, but not a total surprise, because our manufacturing customers have been telling us directly that things like Microsoft Teams have really become a mission-critical platform, partly driven by the pandemic, but really the idea of hybrid work and the fact that there's a lot of communication that has to go on between frontline workers and kind of engineers came out loud and clear. So I think they expect now that whatever they're building, they want that integration with easy-to-use collaboration tools that they've already invested in many cases. So I think for me, those were some of the key takeaways. Manufacturing protocols was another, right? I think we kind of consulted with you a little bit on giving them a nice list of what were the potential protocols or standards, if we could really call them standards, right?
Sure.
That they could pick from, and there was no clear, we had almost as many different responses, right? There wasn't a clear winner on that.
Par for the course.
But maybe hand it back to you, and I'm sure you've got some additional takeaways.
Well, one of the things that I noticed is that, we've been talking at a high level typically with a lot of clients about, why are you doing this digital transformation? And of course the answer is, well, we really have to. It's do it or die pretty much. Right. But one thing that came out is that a lot of folks in the survey were able to point to specific objectives business objectives that they were also seeking, like, increasing their revenue or customer satisfaction or, supply chain resilience, and even workforce issues were among the top ones, as I recall. So those are some of the big things that are, pretty concrete that can help drive some of this stuff in the short term.
Right, and I tended to focus on our learnings as Microsoft and what we could do to help. But yeah, very much we got a lot of great insights into the business outcomes they were driving, right? So
another thing a couple things that came up were things like factory data and how to manage it and right. What kind of model you need. And well, let's just start with that.
Yes, we saw across all three geos and all three roles, we really saw a lot of consistency. I kind of touched on this a little bit earlier on, and maybe I just framed it as factory data model, but it was it played into a number of the other areas you've talked about, Greg.
Well,
which
factory
was
data and cloud. Let's talk
well.
about that. Oh, yeah.
And then there was the idea of where does that data reside? So for kind of the long list of applications that apply to the factory, and we went through everything from, as I recall, I think we had PLM, we went through kind of maintenance systems, we went through training systems. That whole list we went through and really asked them, MES of course, how could I forget MES and SCADA, right? But we really asked about all those things and which were running on the premise today and which were moving to the cloud. And we did split it into private and public cloud. And that's where we saw a lot of differences between how IT thought about it. They were much more optimistic about moving a lot of that data and application workload to the public cloud, whereas OT still remains to be convinced. They're quite happy to take advantage of private cloud to get the benefits of scale and some of those high performance computing workloads, for example, but much more conservative, presumably because they understand some of the challenges in terms of data protocols, the latency and how that could impact them. Interestingly, it was not as much about security this time. What are your thoughts? Because I think you had some thoughts on the security responses. Right?
Well, it's always the security is always an important factor, but you could argue that it's the foremost factor, but it always takes the second page anyway. So. And Colin, we're kind of out of time.
Yeah.
So I know you and I could go on forever, but I want to thank you for your time today and for what we've done. Nice job, and thank you very much.
Thanks, Greg. Look forward to digging deeper into the results of the survey. I think there's a lot more insights we can still glean.
Excellent. I've been speaking today with Colin Masson from Microsoft. Thanks for joining us.